discussion chairman replies when addressed by the teacher, and as requested, she asks the class if it wishes to talk more about its choice of standards for working, now written on the blackboard. These are: follow directions, know what you are doing, work steadily and quietly, cooperate with classmates, take good care of tools and materials,
This
respect for
video
other
was
people's
taken from a
work.
classroom in the 1950s. Calancis described the traditional classroom as follows. For most of the time, an individual learner had to sit in silence. The primary written communications in this classroom was the textbook, and the learners produced their work for an individual of one, the assessing teacher. For many years, our education systems were designed around the teacher as the central figure. The teacher was the expert, the source of knowledge, and the master of subject matter. This model worked well in an era when access to information was limited and when expertise was equated with authority. But today, the learning landscape has changed dramatically. Information is abundant, and learners can access knowledge anytime, anywhere. There's also a changing demographics with learners' attention span shortened by the constant exposure to social media and its algorithms. And students expect that lessons are more interactive and participatory. As knowledge becomes more dynamic and interconnected, and as learners engage with multiple sources of information, teachers need to become not just content experts, but designers of learning. As Dinham explained, the function of teaching has become more and more to arrange, design, and implement a context in which learning can flourish. The problem is that many learning institutions continue to operate with models where teachers are seen primarily as content experts. There are also not enough studies that show how learning institutions can provide a more enabling environment for teachers to become designers of learning. This presentation will discuss how learning institutions can create a learning environment that is more conducive and supportive for teachers to become designers of learning. Before we talk about the interventions, we need to ground the discussion on learning environment from the perspective of critical realism. Gordon Brown explains, the learning environment is the set of conditions that enable and constrain learning. For Brown, the learning environment is more than just the location where learning takes place. The learning environment, in his view, is a dynamic system of interconnected factors and has causal powers and tendencies, social, cultural, physical, and digital, that together enable or constrain how learning unfolds. For educators, this means that we must pay attention not only to the pedagogy or content, but also to the deeper structures, relationships, and material conditions that make learning possible. Gordon Brown pointed out that from a critical realist perspective, learning is emergent. It arises from the interaction of people, ideas, and environments. It is not just a mental or social process, but a phenomenon grounded in real-world conditions, in the ontology of the environment. To design for learning and to design the learning environment, we must then attend to the causal mechanisms, the alignment of conditions that make learning possible. If we accept that learning is emergent from its environment, then redesigning that environment becomes essential. This understanding forms the foundation of our intervention, reimagining the learning environment to support the teacher's evolving role from content experts to designers of learning. In the next part of our presentation, we will explore the four interconnected components of developing the learning environment to support teachers as designers of learning: pedagogy and curriculum, faculty recruitment, development, and evaluation, learning space both physical and digital, and support services. The first component focuses on pedagogy and curriculum. Here, the key intervention is to shift our attention on not just on the pedagogy for content transmission, but more importantly, to design learning. Curriculum and pedagogy needs to be truly outcome-based. Flexibility is key. Rather than a rigid sequences of content, curricula should emphasize the competencies that we are targeting to achieve our desired learning outcomes. In terms of teaching and learning activities, they should help build the capability of learners to deal with complexity and uncertainty, with students made to analyze, create, and apply concepts rather than merely receive them. Active learning approaches such as inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, and design thinking also help cultivate autonomy and problem solving. Assessment practices should likewise evolve. There should be more authentic assessments that measure learning outcomes rather than rote memorization. When pedagogy and curriculum align in this way, the classroom becomes a living laboratory of exploration rather than a venue for information delivery. The second component addresses faculty. Transforming teaching begins when we transform how we recruit, develop, and evaluate teachers. Institutions must hire educators not just for their subject mastery, but for their openness to innovation and collaboration. Faculty recruitment can include portfolio-based applications that showcase their teaching philosophy and sample learning designs, not just publication records. Once on board, faculty development becomes continuous and collaborative. Workshops, peer mentoring, and learning communities can build capacity in instructional design, digital pedagogy, and reflective practice. Equally important is the system of teacher evaluation. Traditional metrics like student satisfaction or research output must be complemented by indicators that capture creativity in learning design, student engagement, and evidence of learning outcomes. Recognition and rewards should reinforce the identity of the teacher as a designer, not just someone who delivers content. The third component involves learning spaces, both physical and digital. Space is not neutral. It shapes how people think and behave. When rooms are built for lectures, lectures are what happens. But when spaces are flexible, technology-enabled, and inclusive, collaboration and experimentation naturally follows. Access to tools, whiteboards, and digital displays support creative exploration. Digital spaces must equally be intentional. Learning management systems, online classrooms, and collaborative apps should not simply replicate the classroom, they should extend it, offering personalized feedback, multimedia engagement, and support for co-creation. When physical and digital space are aligned, they extend the learning environment beyond the classroom walls, creating a continuous ecosystem of learning. The fourth and last component is support services. No teacher works alone. Support services form the backbone of a thriving learning ecosystem. For teachers, access to instructional design units, educational technologies, and data analytics can make innovation possible. These support help translate ideas into concrete designs and provide feedback on what works and what doesn't work. For students, services such as academic advising, counseling, and digital literacy training ensure that they can fully engage in learner-centered environments. Across these four dimensions, pedagogy, faculty development, learning space, and support services, one theme unites them: alignment. Such alignment allows a teacher greater agency to become an effective designer of learning of her class. This alignment enables a teacher's role as designers of learning, not isolated from content expertise, which is still important, but expanding it, integrating design thinking, empathy, and reflective practice into the craft of teaching. But learning environments are open systems, not only because they have porous borders, but in a stronger sense, they continue to respond to both internal and external factors, changing over time as new beliefs, contexts, and interactions enter them. Critical realism draws our attention to this openness. Even the most tightly prescribed curriculum cannot fully control how learning happens because learners and teachers bring their own beliefs, experiences, and understanding into the environment. These often interact and sometimes conflict with what is formally taught. Recognizing this reminds us that designing for learning means openness for emergence and for transformation. In summary, through critical realism, we see that learning does not happen in a vacuum. It emerges from the environment that we as educators have the power to shape and to design. By focusing on the conditions that make learning possible, we position teachers as architects of experience, curators of inquiry, and facilitators of growth. Ultimately, this shift is about evolving the culture of education, requiring leadership commitment, institutional alignment, and continuous reflection. Thank you.